Hey folks, this is Tom with Linux for the Windows guy, and we're going to be configuring our backup server. And this is for the series of videos in the uh, building an enterprise class backup solution running on Linux for your Windows workstation. It's not a 100% free solution. The software that runs as the backup agent, if you will, on the Windows servers does cost money. It's not free. So but it's very reasonably priced. 40-50 bucks for a workstation license, $100 or whatever for a server license, and you're set. So when you compare that to the tens of thousands of dollars that other enterprise class backup solution companies want to charge you, not in addition, they want to charge you like a maintenance and support fees, and they want you to replace hardware all the time, and it could be disaster recovery, and backups can be a very expensive part of the IT process, especially when you consider the amount of maintenance that traditional systems like tape drives and your servers and stuff like that cost. Just the amount of time, it can become someone's full-time job just to monitor and troubleshoot and fix the backups. And so this is a solution that runs on a Linux server, uses a little bit of closed source but very reasonably priced software that works very well, and a lot of custom scripts and customized batch files to make the process automated, give you daily reports, all that kind of stuff. So what we're going to do today is configure the server. We're going to set up some RAID in the server. So this is just an excellent video if you need to know how to configure RAID in CentOS 6. I'm using CentOS 6.5. You could use 7 for this. The rest of my environment on this day is still running 6.5 because of the Kerberos bug. I'm trying to make a domain controller on 7. So maybe when they get that worked out in 7.1 or 7.2 or 7.3, I'll be going to 7. But today, we're still using 6.5. So without further ado, we'll just jump right in here and get started setting up this box. Now I'm going to be configuring this today in a hypervisor virtual box. As I've said in previous videos, whenever I talk about the host machine, I am talking about my actual Windows workstation that I'm running this hypervisor on. Whenever I talk about the guest machine, I am talking about one of the virtual computers that I have created that's running in that window and is running on my host machine through that hypervisor. You can download virtualbox.org. It is open source, freely available software that you can get at virtualbox.org, and I'll put a link down below. So I'm going to click new to create a new guest, a new virtual machine. And this is going to be called Backup 1. And it's going to be running Linux. And we're going to select Red Hat 64-bit because CentOS is the free version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We're going to click Next. And we're going to make this 2048 megs or 2 gigs. One note here is in a production backup server, you want to put as much RAM in as you can. 4 gigs would be plenty. 8 gigs might be slightly overkill. But the more RAM you have, it will dedicate that to disk caching, which will make your RAID performance and disk performance better, since one of the main things this box is going to be doing is having file backup streamed to it via Samba. RAM is a good idea. However, I only have 8 gigs of RAM in my host machine that I'm running this hypervisor on, so I'm going to have to live with about 2 gigs. I want to create a virtual hard drive now, so I'm going to hit create here. I'm just going to use the standard VirtualBox disk image, and it's going to be dynamically allocated. And again, that means that it's going to take space off of my host computer's hard drive as it's needed. It's not going to go out like if it's a fixed size and I make a 50 gig disk, it's going to make a 50 gig file. So dynamically allocated is faster and more efficient. There may be a slight performance impact. I'm not sure. And I'm going to call this disk, instead of backup 1, OS 1 for operating system 1. And I am going to make it, 50 gigs should be plenty. And since I'm putting the full desktop on here, let's make it a little bigger. Let's go ahead and make it 70 gigs. We'll hit create. And now I'm going to go in here and right click and hit settings. And I want to do a couple of tweaks. Really one tweak. I'm going to go to system, processor. I'm going to give it one extra CPU, help it run a little faster, spread that up across the 4 cores on my host machine. And I'm going to go to storage. And I see my SATA controller here. I want to add another hard disk. I'm going to create a new disk, VirtualBox disk image. It's going to be dynamically allocated, and it is also going to be 70 gigs. And I'm going to change the name on this to OS2. This will be my second operating system disk. Hit create, and now I see both disks here. Now I want to create a couple of disks that I'm going to actually keep my backups on. And this, I'm going to hit add to hard disk, create a new disk, a VirtualBox disk image, and I'm going to do dynamically allocated, and I'm going to make these 200 gigs because that's where I'm going to hold some test backups, so I need a little space there. Now I am a little close on space on my C drive, so what I have done is I have another 2 terabyte drive that has about 800 gigs free. We're going to come down here. I made a folder called VirtualBox disks. I made a folder called backup 1, and I'm going to name this disk data 1. And I'm going to save that. And now what I'm going to do is right click here and copy this so that I can just paste that into my next disk, make things a little bit faster. And then I'm going to click create. And I see it's created that disk there. I'm going to hit add, create new disk, VirtualBox disk image again, dynamically allocated. And now I'm just going to come up here, hit my delete key, then right click and hit paste. And I'm going to make this one 200 gigs as well and say create. Oh, and I forgot, I have to change this to data 2. Create. So now I see OS1, OS2, data 1, data 2. So that's good. I've got my disks created. You could, in a real machine, you might want to do more than 2 data disks and do a RAID 5. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I think one of the main advantages to mirroring disks is each disk has a complete copy of the data. So if you have some weird crap go on and stuff gets kind of blown up, you can rip one of those disks out, get it on another workstation, and start getting data off of it if you need to. That's why I like RAID 1. The bad part is if you're not encrypting your file system and that disk dies and you have sensitive information on it and you want to RMA it, you better not ship that disk back because it could fall in the wrong hands. RAID 5 kind of helps eliminate that possibility because it's striping the data across all the disks. So you have to have at least all of the disks minus 1 to be able to get the data. So you're a little bit safer if you have to send one back. From one disk, you cannot get any complete data or information, which can be kind of nice. However, there is an impact performance in RAID 5 on writes. It's not as bad as it used to be, like back in the early Novell days when we were playing with 286s and 386s. It's actually pretty good this day with extra RAM and cache. You might not even notice it, but it writes slower than it reads. So that's something to consider where we're going to be writing a lot of data to this on a daily basis, on a regular basis. RAID 1 may give you a little bit better performance. Of course, RAID 0 will give you even better performance. However, it has no redundancy. And you may say, well, if I had one disk, that gives me no redundancy. But guess what? Now you put 2 disks in there, you still have no redundancy, but you have twice the capacity for a failure. So you've doubled your chance of a failure without having any redundancy. So I don't recommend RAID 0 for any type of information that would be critical, that if you lost it. I would recommend RAID 0 for things like swap files. Okay, we'll go ahead and say OK. And now we have our machine created. We'll click on Start, and we will power this machine up. No, it's going to say it can't find a bootable device, and that's because I need to click on Devices, CD DVD Devices, and then I'm going to choose a virtual CD DVD disk file. And I'm going to pick my CentOS 6.5 64-bit binary DVD number 1 and map that as my DVD drive. Now I'm going to have to reboot the machine, so I'll come to Machine and hit Reset. And it'll say, hey, are you sure you want to reset? And I'll say, yep, reset. And now it's booted off of that virtual DVD. I want to install a system, so I'm going to hit Install or Upgrade an existing system. I'm just going to press Enter. And it's going to boot up for us. And this will take just a split second to run. Okay, now it's asking us if we want to test the installation media, the CD. Since we're using an ISO file, there's absolutely no reason to do that. But even if I have a real DVD, I usually just chance it, skip it. That test takes forever to run. And if it blows up, I'll just try another DVD and reinstall, right? I'm going to skip. Okay, so now we have CentOS 6, and we want to click Next to get started with installing our operating system. Let me move this over a little bit so that I can be sure you can see this entire window. Okay, so now I'll click Next, and I want English, and I want US English, and I'm using just basic disks, so basic storage devices. And yep, I'm fine with wiping out any of the data that's on them. And now I'm going to name the server. It's going to be Backup1. If I could type. Jeez. Okay, Backup1. We're going to click Next. That is my time zone, so I don't need to change anything here. I'll click Next. Now I'm going to type in a password. And this password is going to be just a simple one. And I'm going to click Next, and it's going to say, hey dummy, you've chosen a really, really bad password that anybody could hack. It's stupid. I'm going to say, yeah, just use it anyway, because this is not a production server. And I'm going to create a custom layout. I'm not going to let Linux do the partitions, because I'm setting up all these RAID partitions, and I need to set this up myself. So we're going to click Create Custom Layout, click Next. And so now it shows us, here's all our hard drives. And we see that we have two 70 gig drives and two 200 gig drives. Now, the Linux operating system itself is going to require us to have at least 3 partitions. And those 3 partitions are enough for me. You can create additional ones for different folders or different directories, if you will. Folders is a Windows word, right? So if you want to, so say you had a /homes or a /user, well, like /usr, and that had a lot of space in it, or you knew it was, you could make that a partition on a separate disk. And you would just make the mount point /homes or /usr, okay, /var, okay. And if there's not another disk for it, it's just going to fall under the one that has the mount point of /. So at the very basic, you need a mount point /, and all your directories would fall under that. Now, you're also going to need a /boot, which is where it puts some of its boot up files. So you have to have that. You're also going to need a swap partition. Now, on my swap partition, we're going to make that RAID 0, and you'll see that in the next step. And then I'm going to make these other two drives are going to be slash D2D backups, which stands for disk to disk backups. And that's because I originally came from a Unitrends world for my backup solution, and that's what they called it. So that's what I've called it on my servers. You can name it something else, but all of my sample scripts are written to understand disk to D2D backups. So you may want to name it the same as I'm naming it here if you just want to put my scripts in place and use them, and you don't want to have to go through and rewrite them and edit them. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started here. We're going to click the Create button, and we're going to go to RAID partition, and we're going to create, and we're going to go to our first drive, and slash boot doesn't need much space, so we're going to make this 100 megs, and we're going to say okay, and then we're going to hit create again, and it's going to be a RAID partition, and it's going to be on the second drive, SDB, and it's also going to be 100 megs. And this is just where we're defining the partitions that we're going to mirror and put together or put into RAIDs. We're not defining the mount points at this time. But we need to think about our mount points and what's going to go on these partitions as we create them. So now we're going to create another RAID partition. That RAID partition will go on the first disk, and it's going to be 1024 megs, which is 1 gig, and we're going to say okay, and then we're going to create a second one that's identical, RAID partition, create, and it's going to go on the second disk, and it's also going to be 1024. Say okay. Now we're going to create a third partition, and this one will be our mount point for slash for root, and we'll hit create, and we'll go SDA, and now we're going to select fill to maximum allowable size, which is just going to use the rest of that disk. Okay, and now we're going to hit create again, RAID partition, create. We're going to do the second disk, fill to maximum allowable size. Okay, and now I need to create two partitions where my actual backups folder or directory is going to go. And so I'm going to hit create. I'm going to do a RAID partition, and I'm going to select the SDC, the third disk, and I'm just going to make one partition filled to the maximum allowable size. And I'm going to do the same thing for the SDD, or the fourth disk, RAID partition, create, SDD, fill to maximum allowable size, okay. So now I'm just going to double check. I have 1024, a 1 gig partition, and a 1 gig partition on these first two disks, 100 meg and 100 meg, and a 70 gig and a 70 gig, and then I have a 204,799, a 204,799. They're all the same size, which is what we want. So now we're ready to start creating the RAID devices, which will have the mount points. So the first device we're going to create is going to be the boot, and we're going to create a RAID device this time. Create, and we're going to make this mount point slash boot. Don't do what I did last night and type slash boot. It won't boot for you. And so this is going to be RAID 1. RAID 1 is mirroring. I would recommend that if you don't understand RAID levels, you go out and Google around and do a little bit of reading about it. And then we're going to make the 100 meg and this 100 meg. The 100 meg on each disk is going to be for our boot partition, and ext4 is fine for that. You can make it ext3 or something if you want. Some older distros like CentOS 5, I believe, would not understand ext4 for a boot, but CentOS 6 you're fine. Say okay, and it'll shave a little bit off for some reason when it does this. That's fine. 99 megs. So we're going to hit create again, and then we're going to create a RAID device. Create, and don't type anything for the mount point. This is going to be our swap file, which has no mount point. We just select it to a file system type of swap, and then we'll choose 1024 and 1024. Now, for these, we really have 2 gigs of RAM. We like to have a 2 gig swap file. A lot of times, a general rule is make your swap file the same size as your RAM, unless you have a whole crap load of RAM. Then you would cut that back. If you got 128 gigs of RAM, don't make a 128 gig swap file. But if you, in general, if I had 4 gigs, I'd make 4 gigs worth of swap file. If I had 8 gigs, I might still, though, just make a 4 gig swap file, which would probably be fine. But I only created 1 gig partitions, right? Well, what I'm going to do is make these RAID 0. And this spans them together, which means it's going to write our swap file across both of those disks. And that's going to increase our performance because we now have 2 sets of spindles for reads and writes instead of 1 spindle. And so now we'll go ahead and say OK. And that makes our swap file. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and hit create again. And we're going to do a RAID device, create. This mount point is going to be /, so this is going to be our root mount point. And we're going to go ahead and type RAID 0. When you're talking about root in the file system, that's not the same as root when you log in. That's the root user. The root of the file system is /. That's the root directory of your file system. And so now we're going to go ahead and select these 2 70 gig partitions. And you see it kept RAID 0 because I set that other one for RAID 0. Make sure you drop this down and select RAID 1. It sucks to get your whole server built and set up and then look at it and go, oh no, I made it RAID 0. I have to start all over from scratch. Ask me how I know that. I actually had a server built, had driven to another city, installed it in the rack in a data center, got back to my city at my desk, and I'm like, oh, I need to check the disk space. I'm like, what? I have twice as much as I should. So I drove back to the data center, got the server, had to wipe it out, reinstall it, reset everything up from scratch, had to take it back 2 days later and go through the whole process again. So double check this. So we're going to say OK, and then we're set. Now, I want to create a RAID 1 on these as well for my data to be stored on my backup data. So I'll hit create, RAID device, create, and this is going to be /disk to disk backups /D to D B UCK Okay, that's what all my scripts are written for. So just to make it easy on yourself, you should name it the same thing. And this is going to be RAID 1, and it's going to be on these 2 disks. So we're going to say OK. And now what I'm going to do is look up here and make sure that these sizes are roughly right before I continue, so that I know I didn't make any mistakes. 100 gigs was for my boot. That would mean it was mirrored. 2 gigs would mean that those 2 1 gig partitions here are spanned together for the swap file, which is what I wanted. This is 70 gigs, which is what I wanted for my root file system, and 200 gigs for disk-to-disk backups. So now we're ready to go ahead and click Next. And it's going to say, hey, we're going to wrap out your partition table. You're okay with that? And you're going to say, yep, destroy it, man. Destroy all that data and make my file system. And now it's going to give you one final chance to say, hey, we're getting ready to wipe out your disks. Are you sure? And you say, yep, we want to write changes to the disk. So if you had your pictures and favorites and porn stored on there, it's gone now. Well, with the right forensic software, you might be able to get some of it back. I don't know. I'm not a file recovery specialist. So this is going to take a little while to run through and format these out. Now this will take less time in a virtual machine because it's just kind of writing just the super blocks and it's handing all the other information back to it real quick. On a real machine, it's going to take longer. Linux doesn't have a quick format like Windows does because Linux file systems are different. They write super blocks throughout the disk, which are kind of like your partition tables that are roughly kind of like that in Windows. In the Windows world, you have one big master file allocation table, and when it runs out of space, it creates another one somewhere else on the disk, and when that one runs out of space, it creates another one, and then those can even get fragmented. Okay. And then, because it might have to fragment a file allocation table because it couldn't find a contiguous block of space, and that really screws you up. But then every time it goes to find a file, it has to go back and say, okay, and then it says, okay, here's the next chunk of that file. It goes and finds it and says, okay, goes back and where's the next chunk of the file and finds it, comes back and says, okay. That's why you have to run all these defragmentation utilities and most of them won't defragment the file allocation table, which is a whole, it's kind of like a problem that compounds itself. In Linux, the more fragmented your file system is, generally the better and faster it's going to run, because there's super blocks located throughout the disk. So it just has to hit that next super block to find out where it needs to go for the next section of the file. And Linux file systems, I'm not a file system guru. This is things that I've been told by people who are. So if I'm wrong, please correct me. But Linux file system uses something called elevator file access, which is basically, it has roughly 128 buffers for its I/O operations, say on the disk. And if there's 60 things queued and it's looking for thing number 1, and it happens to come across thing number 30 in the interim, while it's going to that next super block or that next file, it'll go ahead and pick up thing number 30, hand it back, and then continue on to thing number 1. So it's kind of like an elevator where it stops. If you're going to floor number 5 and somebody hits 3, it stops on 3 on the way. It doesn't go to 5 and come back to 3. So that's one of the reasons Linux file systems are really fast and really good. It's one of the things that Linux just has done beautifully, correctly, and right. Okay, so we're going to install the bootloader, and I just take the default here and let it install it where it wants. I've never changed this. I'm not sure why you would want to. I should probably do some more reading on bootloaders. I've only had to do that grub thing a few times, and I really don't completely understand it yet, but I really haven't needed to. So we're going to go ahead and click next. Okay, so now for this particular server, where before I've done minimal installs, I'm going to do a full desktop install. And the reason for that is I want to have some shortcuts to my latest backup reports, some scripts that I can click on to run things manually, so I can remote into this guy with VNC and do a few things. I want LibreOffice to view my backup reports, and I want to be able to set up a printer to print them if I want to print them off. So that's all more easily done if you have a full desktop. I guess you could do minimal desktop. I'll just do the full desktop in this instance. I think it should work fine. So we're going to go ahead and click next. It all looks good. And then we'll see. I think it's going to start installing after this. It may ask us one more question. Yep, it's going to start installing. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video at this point, and then we'll be back when this is finished. Okay, as you can see here, all of the stuff has installed. It wants us to go ahead and reboot. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Click reboot and let this come back up. And then we'll just kind of do some maintenance stuff, install some of the prerequisite packages, and go ahead and install some of the go ahead and install the updates. And then that will pretty much be it for this video. So I will be back as soon as this is finished rebooting. Okay, so we've gone ahead and come up to the welcome screen. Now you don't get this on the previous server where we just did the text-based install for our domain controller. You don't see any of this. Here you're going to see a few things. So we're going to go ahead and click the forward button, and it's going to give us our license agreement, and we're going to say, yep, we agree to that license agreement. Now it's going to want us to create a user. You can create a user here if you want to. I don't. I just go ahead and use root, even though that's typically considered a no-no. But like I said, this box will be sitting inside the network, inside the firewall, and all the information that it holds that's critical is encrypted. So yeah, I mean, it increases the possibility of it to get hit by another machine and be used as like in a zombie attack for something. But I just don't. But yeah, you can always create another user and then SU when you need to do an operation as root. And so I'm going to say, yeah, I'm sure I want to continue. And date and time's good. You're going to say forward. And here's if we want to enable KDEM. So this is if you have a kernel panic where the kernel crashes. This will log some information. I don't know. It's always been stable enough for me that you really don't have to worry about it. It'll reserve some of your memory for kdump. I'd rather have the memory, so I just turn that off. But you can leave that on if you have a crash. It'll give you more diagnostic information that you may be able to get with some of the Linux Jedi and get some help with it. And so it says, hey, you need to reboot after this is complete, and we'll go ahead and say, yep, that's fine. And so now it's going to go ahead and reboot now, and I will be right back after this is done rebooting. Okay, so now we have rebooted, and we see our kind of login screen here. So we're going to go ahead and click Other, and then we're going to put in our username of root, and we're going to put in our password, and we're going to say login, and it's going to come up with a big warning message here, most likely. This would run a little faster if I dedicate a little more RAM to it, but we'll see here what the warning says in a minute. It's going to tell us, like, hey, idiot, you're logging in as the root into this thing, and you can blow everything up and screw it up. I'm going to say, yeah, don't show me that again. I don't care. Hit close. And now we're at our desktop, and we're going to do some maintenance and some installation of some stuff. Okay, so we're at our desktop, and what I'm going to do first is go ahead and put my my terminal. I'm going to go ahead and add that launcher to the desktop just by right-clicking it. And I want to go ahead and get my file browser, add that launcher to the desktop, and I'll add my system monitor launcher to the desktop, and I'll add my disk utility to the desktop. And those are things that I'll probably use quite often, and there'll just be shortcuts out there for them that way. And so we'll go ahead and open up a terminal window. And I like to change the colors on the terminal window, so I'll do that real quick. Under profile preferences, uncheck that. That's all good for the font. And we want to change our colors. Uncheck that. That's where I want to uncheck it. And I'm going to use the green on black. Okay, so give me just a second. I'll pause this, and then we'll zoom it in right on the actual box. Okay, so I was gonna just do this from the terminal prompt, do my updates, and then it dawned on me, like, oh, we have to configure the network adapter. As we can see here, it is not currently turned on up here. So we can just click System ETH0, and that's going to go ahead and give us a dynamic IP address. But I really would like to have a static IP address on my backup server. So what I'm going to do is come down here and go to administration, is it? No, preferences. Okay, so we're going to click on the system and the preferences, and we're going to come down to network connections. Since I did this on my last video from the command prompt, I thought you might like to see how it's done from the GUI. So we see this is our wire connection, system ETH0. And we're going to go ahead and click on this, and then we're going to go to our IPv4 settings. And right now it's set for automatic DHCP. We're going to drop that down, and we're going to say manual. And now we're going to hit the add button right here to add an address. And this is going to be 10.100.110. and we'll say 160. Okay, and then our net mask is going to be 24, and our gateway is going to be 10.100.110.1. Excuse me. And so now we're going to go ahead and put in a DNS server, which is going to be 8.8.8.8, so we can get out to the internet. And then we'll go ahead and set this to what my domain name was on my other servers for now, frugal.local. My favorite little domain name. In IPv6, that method's just ignored. That's good. And then we want to click this checkbox that says connect automatically. We're going to apply these changes. And I'm going to go ahead and close this. Now, the problem is I did not bridge this network adapter yet. So that IP address won't be in the range of my regular network. So I'm just going to go ahead and shut this machine down and change that setting on the network adapter in VirtualBox, and then I'll be back to show you how we do that. Okay, so here we see that the machine's powered off, and we're going to go ahead and right click this and hit settings, and we need to go network, and then we need to go ahead and change this from NAT mode to bridged adapter, and that will bridge it to the same network that my host machine is on. So I can see that from my host machine. I could use PuTTY to SSH into it, or back up to it from my regular network. It's not on its own little firewall network now. So we'll do that, and we'll go ahead and start this machine back up, and then I will be back, and we'll get started loading those updates and packages. Okay, so here we are. We're back, booted up, logged in, back at the terminal prompt, and we'll go ahead and verify that we can see the internet. Oh, let me click in here first. Okay, ping, and we'll do www.google.com, and we're getting a reply, so we'll hit Control C to stop that. And now we're ready to go ahead and update our system, which is going to be yum space update dash y, and we'll let this run. It's going to take quite a while. It's probably got like 1,000 packages it'll have to load updates for all the software that's installed and all the different services and everything. So while this is running, I'll go ahead and pause the video, and then I'll be back when the updates are finished. Okay, so now we have got all the updates loaded, and what I will do is run yum update -y one more time just to make sure we got them all, and we did. So now we want to install the Samba server. As part of the desktop installation, Samba client will be installed, but we need the Samba server. So we're going to yum install, and then we're going to do Samba. I believe it's -server. Maybe it's not. Oh, it's just yum install Samba. Okay. So we're going to do yes. I haven't done my command reference yet on this one, so I have to go back after I'm done and look at the video and do a command reference. So I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants here. The other thing that I know we're going to need to install is going to be yum install vnc-server. And we're waiting on that other install to finish. Now we're good. So it's going to install the Tiger VNC. And then I think we want to do yum install VNC. What's the VNC client? No. Well, hang on a second. Let me find out what the name of it is, and then I will be right back with you. Okay, it looked like I was right. It is Tiger VNC, but I forgot my S in install. So we'll press enter here, and let's see if this works. Yep. Okay. And I like this because I can put VNC on my Windows servers. And then I can hit them real quick if I need to kind of look and say, hey, why isn't this backup running? So I can hit them right from the server if I'm sitting in front of it, or remote it into it. I think that's pretty much all the packages that we have to install. And so what we'll be doing in the next video is starting to get our Samba share set up and starting to get our scripts configured. One thing I will check real quick here is if I do a df-h, I'll see that here's all my mount points, and that they're all here available and working. So that's all good. And then we'll cover also in a future video, I'm not sure if it'll be this one, how to monitor the RAID and how to set it up so that it will email you if the RAID, if there's a RAID failure. So we'll be covering all that stuff in future videos as well. So for now, that's it on this video. Be happy, have fun playing with Linux, and hopefully you find these videos useful, and you'll be able to implement some of these solutions possibly in your Windows environment. And like I want to say, I'm always open to feedback. I am not a fully trained Linux Jedi by any means. So if you have ideas, things that I could do better or different, especially when it gets into the scripts, because I'm not a scripter, I just kind of figured it out on my own. I'm sure there are things I could do more efficiently and better in my scripts. And by all means, I would welcome any input that anyone has. Okay, that's it for now. And I will talk to everyone later and see you in the next video.